Bruce Gordon, author of the book, The Spirit of Attack. In the early 1960s, I was assigned to the 498th Fighter Interceptor Squadron at Geiger Field in Spokane, Washington, and became involved in one of the more interesting shenanigans that went on as units of the Air Force would steal various mementos from each other. The Air Force was making major changes at the end of the Korean War. Many squadrons were upgrading to the Century Series fighters. My squadron was upgrading to the F-106, but many squadrons were just being phased out. One of the fighter squadrons that was being phased out had stolen a moose head from a SAC unit. It was mounted on a plywood plaque that had been painted up with the uniform of an Air Force second lieutenant and named Curtis E LeMoose as an obvious parody on General Curtis E LeMay, who was the commander of the Strategic Air Command at that time. Stealing Second Lieutenant Curtis E LeMoose from the fighter squadron was not that difficult because the squadron was being closed down and there was probably nobody there. Well, SAC did it in their usual heavy-handed way. They sent in a KC-135 tanker to pick him up. There's a lot of space in that tanker. That isn't all fuel. There's a lot of room back there in the fuselage where they could put Curtis E. LeMoose. They loaded him up and flew him back to Spokane, Washington, to Fairchild Air Force Base, not far from our place at Geiger Field, Spokane, Washington. Once they got it back to Fairchild Air Force Base, they called in the local Spokane newspaper and had a big article and a photo of Curtis E. LeMoose, which they published broadly in the paper and with a big challenge to any fighter squadron to steal it from them. And of course, instead of being in an unsecure place, they put Curtis E. LeMoose in their command post on the flight line right beside the B-52s loaded with nuclear weapons, a very secure location, and they challenged us to steal it. I was in the 498th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, the Geiger Tigers, about 20 miles away, and first we tried a telephone call impersonating a general and telling them to move that moose head out of the secure area and put it in a less protected area. They laughed at that attempt. We finally got our base commander and all the base resources behind us for an audacious attempt to get it. One of our F-106s would take off at night and fly a mission and come back over Fairchild Air Force Base. At precisely 2 o'clock in the morning, he would declare an emergency and land at Fairchild Air Force Base. The emergency would bring all sorts of emergency vehicles to the runway to help with the aircraft in trouble, and our emergency vehicles, including some ambulances, would be already on Fairchild. We would join the group of emergency vehicles streaming through the gates onto the flight line, to go to the emergency. We would then turn off our lights and go to the command post, take Curtis E. LeMoose, and take him home. When the big night came, our F-106 took off and all the vehicles moved in their proper positions. We in the fighter squadrons were in the ambulances as extra manpower if we needed it. But just before 2 o'clock, the F-106 had an actual emergency, an electrical fire. But he held off for several minutes and did not declare an emergency, so he would declare it precisely at 2 o'clock. He called in at 2 o'clock with the emergency and landed at Fairchild. All the emergency vehicles rushed out to the runway, and we rushed in right with them with our sirens and red lights flashing, turned off our lights, and went to the command post. We entered the command post and found just one airman at the command post. So we locked him in a closet and proceeded to take Curtis E. LeMoose off the wall. We had a problem, though. His antlers were so big that he would not fit through the door. We had to take the door off its hinges so we could get him out, and we put him into one of the ambulances, and the rest of us got in the other ambulances. We turned on our sirens and lights and went rushing out all the way back to Geiger. We promptly called the local Spokane newspaper and gave our own press release about stealing the moose, Curtis E. LeMoose, from Fairchild, but we didn't say how it had been done. Then we put Curtis E. LeMoose in our alert hangar, which was guarded, and dared them to take it. Meanwhile, the airman who we had locked up in a closet got out and set off the alarm. The alarm went all the way to SAC headquarters as the nuclear secure area had been breached, and we had even taken the side door off their command post. They knew our F-106 had something to do with it, so they arrested our pilot and interrogated him. But he said he'd had an in-flight emergency. He could show them the burned wires where he had an electrical fire. They knew he didn't have Curtis E. LeMoose, who wouldn't fit into an F-106, and then came our announcement that we had it and they had to get it. A couple of months went by, and it came time for our annual dining in party. Now, a dining in was an idea that we got from the British, from the Royal Air Force, and it started out as a very formal party with toasts and all that, and we dressed in our mess dress uniforms. But toward the end of it, a dining in got to be a pretty rough drinking party. For the dining in, we brought Curtis E. LeMoose in from the alert hangar and put him in the wall of the Geiger Field Officers Club, where we're having our dinner. We were all in the bar room getting adequately lubricated, and the only person in the dining room was one of our airmen adjusting the silverware before the big dinner, when the back door to the dining room opened, and in came some SAC officers who saw the airman, and they offered him some money to stay quiet. Well, he didn't take that. He yelled for help, and all of us came running into the dining room and caught the guys taking Curtis E. LeMoose and they were trying to get him out the back door, but his antlers wouldn't fit through the door, so they couldn't get him out the door. So they abandoned Curtis E. LeMoose and ran off, and we let them go. Some months later, we were having another party at the Officers Club, and the mayor of Spokane, Washington, and a couple of his good friends were our guests of honor. After their talk at dinner, and we were back in the bar getting pretty well lubricated, the mayor asked our squadron commander where Curtis E. LeMoose was. And our squadron commander told him he was down there in our alert facility. Well, the mayor didn't know anything about security, so he and his friends got into their car and drove to the alert facility and tried to drive on in looking for Curtis E. LeMoose. Well, they promptly got arrested. The mayor told the air police that he was the mayor of Spokane, and if they would just call the squadron commander, he would come out and vouch for him and get him released. So the air police called our squadron commander, who came out, took one look at the mayor, and said, "I've never seen this guy in my life. Lock him up." So the mayor spent the rest of the night in one of our jails and was released the next morning. It's now more than 60 years since these events. I don't know where Curtis E. LeMoose is now, but I will always remember him in the competition between the fighters and the bombers of the United States Air Force.